The photograph was the only thing my grandfather with dementia could still remember clearly. While he forgot my name, forgot where he lived, forgot that my grandmother had died 5 years ago, he clutched that faded black and white picture of his World War II platoon like it held the secrets of the universe. Every day he would point to one soldier and whisper the same desperate words. "Find him. He knows." I thought it was just the confusion of a failing mind. I had no idea he was giving me the most important mission of my life. Before we dive into this incredible story, I'd love to know, what's your most treasured family memory? Drop it in the comments below, and be sure to subscribe for more amazing stories every day. Now, let's go back to the nursing home where everything began. The smell of disinfectant and overcooked vegetables hit me as soon as I walked through the doors of Willow Creek Senior Living. It was the same smell every Tuesday and Friday when I came to visit Grandpa Joe, and it never got easier to bear. The place was clean and the staff was kind, but it still felt like a warehouse for forgotten dreams and fading memories. I found him in his usual spot by the window in the common room, the photograph spread across his lap like a treasure map. At 89, Joseph Donovan was still a handsome man, with silver hair that he insisted on combing perfectly every morning, and blue eyes that had once been sharp enough to spot enemy movement from a mile away. But those same eyes now struggled to recognize his own grandson. "Hey, Grandpa," I said, pulling up a chair beside him. "How you feeling today?" He looked at me with the polite confusion that had become our normal greeting. "I'm fine, thank you, young man. Do I know you?" "I'm Zach, your grandson." "Zach," he repeated, testing the name like it was a foreign word. "That's a nice name. Do you know anything about the war?" This was how most of our conversations started now. Grandpa Joe's short-term memory was almost completely gone, but his memories from World War II remained vivid and detailed. He could tell you exactly what he'd eaten for breakfast on D-Day, but he couldn't remember what he'd had for lunch an hour ago. "Tell me about the war, Grandpa," I said, settling into my chair. It was easier to follow his lead than to try to force him back to the present. His face immediately brightened, and he lifted the photograph with trembling hands. "This is my platoon," he said with pride. "The 82nd Airborne, 505th Parachute Infantry Regiment. We jumped into Normandy on June 6, 1944. Finest group of men I ever served with." I'd heard this story dozens of times, but I listened patiently as he pointed to each face in the photograph, reciting names and hometowns like a sacred litany. There were 12 men in the picture, young soldiers with serious faces and eyes that had seen too much. "That's Tommy Rodriguez from Texas," he said, pointing to a baby-faced kid who couldn't have been more than 19. "And that's Big Mike Sullivan from Boston. And there's Jimmy Liu, first Chinese-American in our unit, brave as they come." He continued around the photograph until he reached a tall, thin soldier standing in the back row. This was where the story always took a strange turn. "And this one," Grandpa Joe said, his voice dropping to an urgent whisper, "this one is important. You have to find him." "Who is he, Grandpa?" "He knows," my grandfather said, gripping my arm with surprising strength. "He knows everything. You have to find him and tell him Joe Donovan sent you." "What does he know?" But Grandpa Joe's eyes had already gone distant again, the moment of clarity fading like smoke. "I can't remember," he said sadly. "But it's important, very important." This had been happening for months now. Every visit, without fail, my grandfather would point to the same soldier and give me the same urgent mission. The nursing staff said it was common for Alzheimer's patients to fixate on certain memories or ideas, especially traumatic ones from their past. "It's probably just his way of processing the war," Dr. Julia Vance had explained during one of our family meetings. Many veterans with dementia become obsessed with their service records or old photographs. It's one of the last things they remember clearly. But there was something about the intensity in my grandfather's eyes when he talked about this mystery soldier that made me think it was more than just a random fixation. Even in his confused state, he seemed to understand that this was important, that there was something I needed to know. After my visit that day, I sat in my car in the nursing home parking lot, staring at a photocopy of the platoon picture that I'd made months ago. I'd tried researching the names my grandfather had given me, but most of the soldiers had died decades ago. The few surviving family members I'd managed to contact had never heard of any special secret or important information. But I'd never been able to identify the soldier my grandfather kept pointing to. He was tall and lean, with dark hair and intelligent eyes, standing slightly apart from the others in the back row. My grandfather had never mentioned his name, and none of the military records I'd found had been able to identify him. That night, I called my father to update him on Grandpa Joe's condition. "He's still obsessing over that photograph," I told him, still insisting that I need to find this one particular soldier. My father sighed. "Zach, you know the doctors said this kind of fixation is normal. Dad's mind is trying to hold on to the last clear memories he has." But what if it's not just a fixation? What if there really is something important? Like what? Some kind of buried treasure? A secret military mission? Son, this isn't a movie. Dad's just a sick old man whose mind is playing tricks on him. I understood my father's skepticism. He'd been dealing with Grandpa Joe's decline for years, watching his own father slowly disappear behind a wall of confusion and forgotten names. It was easier to dismiss the photograph obsession as just another symptom than to hope it might mean something. But I couldn't shake the feeling that my grandfather was trying to tell me something important, something that his failing mind could only express through this one clear, persistent message. That weekend, I decided to take a different approach. Instead of trying to research the soldiers online, I drove to the National World War II Museum, hoping that their archives might have more detailed records about the 82nd Airborne. The museum's research librarian, a kind woman named Margaret Foster, spent 2 hours helping me go through their collection of unit histories, personnel records, and photograph archives. The 505th PIR was one of the most decorated units in the 82nd Airborne, she explained as we searched through boxes of documents. They saw action in Normandy, Operation Market Garden, and the Battle of the Bulge. Your grandfather served with some real heroes. We found several references to my grandfather's unit, including a detailed roster of all the men who had served in his platoon. But when we cross-referenced the names with the faces in the photograph, we came up one short.
"That's strange," Margaret said, studying the picture with a magnifying glass. "According to these records, there should only be 11 men in this photograph, but I count 12. "The one in the back," I said, pointing to the mystery soldier. "That's the one my grandfather keeps talking about." Margaret frowned and pulled out another document. "This is interesting. There's a note here about a soldier who was temporarily attached to the unit for a special mission in France. His name was Harold Pemberton, and he was with them for about 6 weeks in late 1944. "Harold Pemberton," I repeated, feeling a surge of excitement. "Do you have any other information about him?" "Let me check our database," Margaret said, turning to her computer. After a few minutes of searching, she looked up with a mixture of surprise and concern. "According to our records, Harold Pemberton is still alive. He's 94 years old and living in a care facility in Oregon." My heart started racing. I'd finally found him. The mystery soldier from my grandfather's photograph was still alive, and he was only a phone call away. "Can you give me his contact information?" Margaret hesitated. I can give you the name of the facility, but you'll have to contact them directly. Privacy laws, you understand? That evening, I called Riverside Veterans Home in Oregon. The woman who answered the phone was polite but cautious when I explained why I was calling. Mr. Pemberton doesn't get many visitors. Are you family? No, but I'm calling about someone he served with during the war. My grandfather, Joseph Donovan. It's very important that I speak with him. There was a long pause. Hold on, please. I waited for what felt like an eternity, my heart pounding as I imagined finally getting answers to the mystery that had consumed my grandfather's failing mind. Sir? The woman came back on the line. Mr. Pemberton says he's been waiting for your call. He'd like to know when you can come visit him. He's been waiting for my call? Those were his exact words. He said to tell you that Joe Donovan was a good soldier and a better friend, and that he's been keeping something safe for him for a very long time. I booked a flight to Portland that same night. Riverside Veterans Home was nothing like the sterile nursing facility where my grandfather lived. It was a converted Victorian mansion surrounded by gardens, with wide porches and the kind of comfortable, lived-in feeling that spoke of genuine care rather than institutional efficiency. Harold Pemberton was waiting for me in the library, a small, bright room lined with books and comfortable chairs. At 94, he was remarkably alert, with silver hair, sharp brown eyes, and the kind of military bearing that never really fades. You must be Zach, he said, standing to shake my hand with a grip that was still firm and strong. You look just like your grandfather did when he was your age. Mr. Pemberton, thank you for agreeing to see me. I have so many questions. Please, call me Harold. And I imagine you do have questions. Your grandfather said you would when the time came. When the time came? Harold gestured for me to sit down, then pulled out a manila envelope from the table beside his chair. Your grandfather gave me this about 20 years ago when he first started noticing the signs. He made me promise to keep it safe until someone from his family came looking for it. Signs of what? The forgetting, Harold said simply. Joe was always the smartest man in our unit. He could remember every detail of every mission, every face of every soldier we served with. So when he started having trouble remembering simple things, he knew what was coming.
I felt a chill run down my spine. He knew he was going to develop dementia? His father had it, and his grandfather before him. Joe said it ran in the family, and he wasn't going to let it take away the most important things. Harold held up the envelope. So he wrote it all down. Everything. And he gave it to me to keep safe. But why you? Why not give it to my father or keep it himself? Harold's expression grew thoughtful. Your grandfather was a wise man, Zach. He knew that watching someone you love lose their mind is one of the hardest things a family can endure. He didn't want your father to have to carry the burden of being the keeper of his memories. But you barely knew him. That's where you're wrong, Harold said with a sad smile. Joe Donovan saved my life in France. We were pinned down by German machine gun fire, and I was wounded, bleeding out in a shell crater. Joe crawled through enemy fire to get to me, then carried me half a mile to safety. I owed him my life. Harold opened the envelope and pulled out a small brass key. But more than that, we understood each other. We were both soldiers, and soldiers understand the importance of completing a mission. Joe's final mission was to make sure his memories survived, even if his mind didn't. He trusted me to see it through. What does the key open? A safety deposit box at First National Bank downtown. Box number 247. Joe set it up 20 years ago and paid the rental fees in advance for 30 years. Harold pressed the key into my hand. He said when someone from his family came looking for the soldier in the photograph, I should give them this key, and tell them that their real inheritance wasn't money or property. It was his mind. The next morning, I stood in the vault of First National Bank, holding the key that my grandfather had entrusted to a fellow soldier 2 decades ago. The safety deposit box was larger than I had expected, and when the bank employee opened it, I saw that it was packed with notebooks, journals, and loose papers. "Take your time," she said, leading me to a private room where I could examine the contents. I opened the first notebook with trembling hands. It was filled with my grandfather's careful handwriting, and the first entry was dated 23 years ago. "My name is Joseph Patrick Donovan. I am 66 years old, and I am beginning to forget things. Small things at first, where I put my keys, what I had for breakfast, the name of the mailman who's been delivering our mail for 10 years. But I know where this is heading. My father forgot everything before he died, and his father before him. It's in our blood, this forgetting. But I refuse to let it take everything. I refuse to let my memories die with my mind. So I am writing it all down. Every story, every lesson, every moment that made me who I am. For my son, for my grandson, for the family I love more than life itself. If you are reading this, it means the forgetting has won, but it also means that Harold kept his promise and that my memories have survived. In these pages, you will find the man I was before the disease took me away. You will find the stories I wanted to tell you, the wisdom I wanted to share, the love I wanted you to know about. This is my real inheritance." I spent the next 6 hours reading through my grandfather's journals, and it was like discovering a treasure trove of family history that I'd never known existed. He'd written about his childhood during the Great Depression, about meeting my grandmother at a USO dance, about the terror and brotherhood of war, about the joy of becoming a father and grandfather.
But more than just events, he'd written about his thoughts, his fears, his hopes for the future. He'd recorded family recipes and the stories behind them. He'd written detailed descriptions of family traditions and the reasons they were important. He'd even included advice for major life decisions, relationship wisdom, and his thoughts on what it meant to be a good man. There were dozens of notebooks spanning decades of his life. Some entries were daily observations, others were longer reflections on important events. All of them were written in his clear, careful handwriting, as if he'd known that someday these words would be all that remained of his mind. One entry, written about 15 years ago, particularly caught my attention. "I went to the doctor today for my annual checkup, and I told him about the forgetting. He ran some tests and confirmed what I already knew, early-stage Alzheimer's disease. He gave me pamphlets about treatment options and support groups, but we both know there's no real cure. I haven't told the family yet. I want to have a little more time to prepare, to get my affairs in order. I've been thinking about Harold Pemberton, my old war buddy. We've kept in touch over the years, Christmas cards and the occasional phone call. He's a good man, a man who understands duty and honor. I'm going to ask him to be the keeper of these memories, not because my family wouldn't do it, but because they love me too much. Watching someone you love disappear piece by piece is a special kind of hell, and I don't want my son or grandson to carry the additional burden of being responsible for preserving who I used to be. Harold will understand. Soldiers know how to complete missions, even the difficult ones, and this is my most important mission, making sure that when my mind is gone, my heart and soul survive in these pages." I closed the notebook, tears streaming down my face. My grandfather hadn't just been preparing for his own decline. He'd been protecting his family from the additional pain of watching his memories slip away while being responsible for preserving them. There was one more item in the safety deposit box, a sealed envelope with my name on it. Inside was a letter dated just 5 years ago. "My dear Zach, If you are reading this, it means you found Harold, and he gave you the key. It also means that my mind has probably deteriorated to the point where I no longer remember your name, even though you are one of the most important people in my life. I want you to know that even though I may not recognize you when you visit me, somewhere deep inside, I know you're there. I know you care. I know you love me. The disease may take my memories, but it cannot take the love that connects us. In these journals, you will find the grandfather you deserve to know, the man who lived a full life, who loved his family fiercely, who tried his best to be worthy of the people who mattered most to him. Read these stories to me, Zach. Even if I don't seem to understand, read them anyway. Sometimes, when the fog lifts for just a moment, I might remember. And even if I don't, the sound of your voice sharing my own stories will be a comfort. You are my legacy, grandson. Not these words on paper, but the man you've become and the man you will continue to be. Carry forward the best parts of our family, and know that you are loved beyond measure. Your grandfather, Joe Donovan. P.S. There's one more thing in the box. Look under the last journal. With shaking hands, I lifted the final notebook and found a small wrapped package underneath. Inside was my grandfather's Purple Heart medal, and a note, "This belongs to you now. You've earned it by completing the mission."
I flew back home that evening with a suitcase full of my grandfather's journals and a heart full of emotions I couldn't begin to process. The mystery that had consumed his failing mind for months had been solved, but the real treasure was far greater than I had ever imagined. The next day, I went to visit Grandpa Joe at Willow Creek Senior Living. He was in his usual spot by the window, the faded photograph of his platoon spread across his lap. "Hello, young man," he said with his usual polite confusion. "Do I know you?" "I'm Zach, your grandson," I said, pulling up my chair, "and I have something to show you." I opened one of his journals to a story about his first date with my grandmother. "Would you like me to read you a story, Grandpa? It's about a young soldier who met the most beautiful girl in the world at a USO dance." His eyes lit up with interest. "I like stories, especially ones about the war." "This one's about love," I said, and began to read his own words back to him. As I read, something remarkable happened. My grandfather's expression changed, becoming more focused, more present. He wasn't remembering the story exactly, but he was connecting with it, recognizing something familiar in the emotions and details. "That's a good story," he said when I finished. "The soldier sounds like a good man." He was. He was one of the best men who ever lived. Over the following months, I established a new routine. Every visit to Willow Creek Senior Living included reading from my grandfather's journals. Sometimes I read about his childhood, sometimes about the war, sometimes about the early days of his marriage or the joy of becoming a father. My grandfather rarely showed signs of recognition, but he always listened intently, and occasionally he would smile or nod at a particularly meaningful passage. The staff noticed that he seemed calmer after our reading sessions, less agitated and confused. "It's like the stories anchor him somehow," Dr. Vance observed. "Even if he doesn't consciously remember them, they seem to provide comfort." My father was amazed when I showed him the journals. He said, "I had no idea Dad was writing all this down, reading through entries about his childhood that he'd never heard before. Look at this. He wrote about the day I was born, about teaching me to ride a bike, about my high school graduation. It's all here." He knew. He knew that someday we'd need these memories more than he would. 6 months after finding the journals, my grandfather's condition took a turn for the worse. He stopped speaking almost entirely and rarely seemed aware of his surroundings. But I continued our reading sessions, sharing his own stories with him, even when he showed no signs of understanding. One afternoon, I was reading about his war experiences when I noticed tears streaming down his face. He couldn't speak, couldn't tell me what he was feeling, but somehow the story had reached him. "That's your story, Grandpa," I whispered, taking his hand. "That's your life, your courage, your love. It's all still here, preserved forever." He squeezed my hand, just once, but firmly, and I knew that somewhere inside his failing mind, he understood. My grandfather passed away peacefully 6 months later, surrounded by family who had been able to know him fully thanks to the memories he'd preserved. At his funeral, I read passages from his journals, sharing stories that brought him to life for people who had only known him in his final confused years. But the most meaningful moment came when Harold Pemberton, now 95 and using a walker, made the trip to Oregon to attend the service.
"Your grandfather was a good soldier and a better friend," he told me after the ceremony. "But his greatest mission wasn't anything he did in the war. It was making sure his family would always know who he really was." "Thank you," I said. "Thank you for keeping his memories safe." "It was an honor," Harold replied. "And Zach, he was right about you. You were worth preserving all those memories for." Today, my grandfather's journal sat on a shelf in my home office. 43 notebooks containing a lifetime of wisdom, love, and carefully preserved memories. I've started reading them to my own young son, sharing stories about his great-grandfather's courage, kindness, and unwavering love for his family. But more than that, I've started keeping a journal of my own. Inspired by my grandfather's foresight, I'm writing down the stories of my own life, the lessons I've learned, the love I feel for my family, the wisdom I hope to pass on to future generations. Because I learned something important from my grandfather's final mission. Memories are too precious to trust to memory alone. The stories that make us who we are, the love that connects us across generations, the wisdom earned through a lifetime of experience. These things deserve to be preserved, protected, and passed on. My grandfather may have lost his mind to dementia, but he never lost his heart, his soul, or his love for his family. Those things live on in the pages he wrote, in the stories he preserved, and in the lives of the people who were lucky enough to be loved by him. The photograph of his war platoon still sits on my desk, but I no longer see it as a mystery to be solved. I see it as a reminder of the bonds that transcend time, the friendships that endure beyond memory, and the wisdom of a man who knew that the most important battles are not fought with weapons, but with love, foresight, and the determination to preserve what matters most. Harold Pemberton kept his promise to a fellow soldier, and in doing so, he gave our family the greatest gift imaginable, the chance to know and remember the man my grandfather truly was, even after his mind could no longer tell us itself. An absolutely powerful story about the bonds of war, the wisdom of preparing for an uncertain future, and how the most precious treasures aren't material possessions, but the memories and love that make us who we are. What's your most treasured family memory? Share your stories in the comments below. If this story of Zach, his grandfather, and the memories that transcended dementia touched your heart and reminded you of the importance of preserving family stories, please hit that like button and subscribe for more incredible stories about the connections that define us. Don't forget to click the notification bell so you never miss an upload. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.